While Xiaoyu was staring at Chui Hongtai with a murderous look, she began to roar. Then, she gathered momentum and slowly advanced towards him, extending her sharp claw and preparing to attack. Upon seeing such a powerful dragon like Xiaoyu, the princess panicked. She tightly gripped the magical staff with both hands and started screaming. As Xiaoyu approached and prepared to attack, Chui Hongtai was shocked and started feeling afraid. Just before Chui Hongtai had time to react, Xiaoyu struck him with her claw, causing his body to hit the ground. She had hit him with such force that even the floor shattered into pieces, causing terrible pain to Chui Hongtai, who began spitting blood from his mouth. The princess fell to the ground, and while holding onto the magical staff with one hand, she closed her eyes and started screaming. As she lay on the ground, she began wondering how this was possible. She couldn't believe that Xiaoyu had defeated Chui Hongtai in just one strike. While Xiaoyu was crushing Chui Hongtai's body with her paw, with the little strength he had left, he reached out to the princess and asked for help. The princess knelt down, turned her body towards Xiaoyu, extended the magic staff towards her. Then she brought her hand closer to the magic staff and activated the magic. Slowly, the staff began to glow, causing a powerful evil energy to start appearing. As the princess stared at Xiaoyu intently, she called Chui Hongtai useless and asked him to hold on a little longer. At that moment, a system window appeared to indicate to Lu Fan that she was using an ability. Xiaoyu raised her head and, while staring at the princess, let out a powerful roar towards her. Within seconds, the roar reached her and the princess quickly covered her ears, ceasing to use the ability. Gradually, the dark aura emerging from the staff began to disappear. A system window appeared to inform Lu Fan that Xiaoyu was using an ability called Dragon's Inheritance. This ability reduced damage received by 50% and provided immunity to all negative effects. It also increased self-regeneration capacity by 500%. Xiaoyu tightly grabbed Chui Hongtai's body using her paw, causing him to start spitting blood and begging her to let go. She lifted Chui Hongtai's body from the ground and forcefully threw it to the side, making it crash against the floor, creating a large cloud of smoke in the process. While holding the staff with one hand, the princess placed the other in front of her face and closed her eyes. Several seconds later, once the smoke curtain began to disappear, Chui Hongtai started crawling towards the princess. He reached out his hand towards her and, while his body was trembling, he apologized to her. As the princess leaned on her magical staff, she stared aggressively at Chui Hongtai. She clenched her teeth tightly and thought that Xiaoyu really was a dragon. Thinking about this, she realized that besides their Jin family's dragon eggs, there were also other dragons that existed. While the princess was lost in her thoughts, Lu Fan stomped on the ground forcefully to get her attention. He addressed her as Princess Jinju, while she held onto the magical staff with both hands. Upon hearing his voice, she quickly turned towards him and couldn't help but feel afraid. Lu Fan was not advancing towards the princess alone, but behind him was the dragoness Xiaoyu. With her wings extended to the sides, she began to stare at the princess with a murderous look. While holding a dagger in one hand, Lu Fan started moving towards the princess and asked her if she wanted to kill him as a way to vent. Upon seeing that Xiaoyu was approaching, Princess Jinju fell to the ground. With one hand gripping onto her magical staff, she supported herself with the other on the floor. Then she started looking at Lu Fan and asked him not to come any closer. Her body began to tremble with fear, while tears were falling from her eyes. She pointed at Lu Fan with the magic staff and reminded him that they had attacked her servant and left him severely injured. She also added that if this wasn't enough, Lu Fan was humiliating and threatening her. While tears were falling from her eyes, she started staring at Lu Fan with a fearful look and asked him if he knew what consequences this would have. She revealed to him that now he was the public enemy of the Taiki realm. Upon hearing the princess's words, Lu Fan unsheathed his dagger and slowly approached her, asking if she was threatening him. While the princess was lying on the ground and pointing her staff at Lu Fan, she saw that he had unsheathed his dagger. Upon realizing this, she was shocked and thought that something bad was going to happen. Several seconds later, Lu Fan reached the princess. He slightly lowered his head and, while staring into her eyes with a murderous look, he reminded her that she herself had ordered her subordinate to attack his family. Upon hearing this, she started feeling even more afraid. She lifted her head slightly towards Lu Fan, and upon seeing his expression, panic set in as she asked him what he was going to do now. Lu Fan asked her if she was not the princess of Realm Taiki. At that moment, Xiaoyu opened her mouth, and while staring at the princess, she began to create a large fireball to attack her. A system window appeared to inform Lu Fan that the ability was charging. While Lu Fan was staring at the princess, He extended his dagger to one side, and while preparing to attack, he explained to her that he didn't care if she was a god or a princess. While the princess was looking at Lu Fan with a fearful gaze, she was left speechless and thought that something bad was going to happen. As Xiaoya's fireball gradually grew bigger, Lu Fan reached out his hand towards the princess, with his other hand preparing to attack. He stared fiercely into her eyes and explained to her that even if he faced a god, he would make them pay double. At that moment, someone riding on a hippogriff started approaching them quickly and caught Lu Fan's attention. This person was none other than Qin Qiu's father, named Qin Shanhai. While holding the reins of the hippogriff with one hand, he began to approach Lu Fan quickly. He stared at Lu Fan and ordered him to stop. Upon hearing the voice, Qin Qiu looked up at the sky and was stunned to see her father. She warned him not to come closer as it was dangerous. Xiaoya turned her head to the side, and upon seeing Qin Shanhai, she thought he was an enemy. While she was preparing the fireball to attack the princess, she turned her body towards him, and while staring at him aggressively, she prepared to attack. Upon seeing this, he gave the order to the hippogriff not to approach her. Lu Fan simply started looking down and remained still for several seconds. While the princess was holding the magic staff with both hands, she closed her eyes and turned her head to one side as she thought she was going to die. Using the dagger, Lu Fan cut the princess's magic staff in half, causing the magic ball to fall to the ground and rendering the staff useless. While Lu Fan was staring at Qin Shanhai, he ordered Xiaoya not to attack. Upon hearing the order, Xiaoya obeyed and closed her mouth, causing the fireball to slowly disappear. As Qin Shanhai rode past her on his hippogriff and began descending towards the ground, Xiaoya simply turned her head towards him and silently watched. Once the hippogriff got close to the ground, Qin Shanhai jumped off and landed on the ground. Several seconds later, the hippogriff sat down on the ground, turned its head towards Xiaoya, and was surprised by her size. While Qin Shanhai was petting the hippogriff, he slightly raised his head towards Xiaoya and he was surprised. He asked Lu Fan to quickly remove the dragon as there were many residents around. He thought that Xiaoya was a real dragon. He felt that she was different from the subspecies, since just being close to her, he could feel immense pressure. Upon hearing her father's voice, Qin Qiu emerged through the hole in the wall of the store. While holding the staff with both hands, she began to look at Lu Fan and asked him to listen to her father and trust them. Lu Fan slightly turned his head back, and upon seeing Qin Qiu, he fell silent and started wondering if he could really trust her father. Several seconds later, Lu Fan gave the order to Xiaoya to transform. Upon hearing the command, she obeyed and extended her hands to the sides, causing an intense fire to gradually appear around her body. At that moment, she began to roar and transform. Several seconds later, Xiaoya transformed, and as she was flying through the air, the hippogriff turned its head towards her and was impressed. While the princess lay on the ground trembling, Qin Shanhai approached her. He crouched down, placed one hand on the ground and rested the other on his knee. He stared at the princess intently and asked if she was okay and what she was doing here. He mentioned that he had just picked her up from the airport and didn't expect to find her here. While the two of them were talking, Qin Qiu grabbed Lu Fan's arm and asked him to come with her. Qin Shanhai closed his eyes and with a pleasant smile explained to the princess that the Qin family driver would be coming soon. He also added that he would take her and her subordinate to the hospital first. At the same time, Lu Fan, Qin Qiu, and Xiaoya entered the store and met Han Qi. She explained to Lu Fan that Qin Qiu had told her that her father might recognize this princess. Lu Fan crossed his arms and, while looking at the princess with an aggressive gaze, Han Qi approached him. She grabbed Lu Fan's arm and, while looking towards the princess and Qin Qiu's father, she explained to him that Qin Qiu had thought of a way to resolve this conflict, and for this reason, she had called her father. While Lu Fan was looking at the princess, he explained to Han Qi that he had a feeling that the princess would not surrender. While they were conversing, Qin Qiu and Xiaoya remained silent listening. At that moment, Qin Shanhai began to walk towards them. He reached out his hand towards them and with a smile, he explained that he completely understood the background of the situation. After saying this, he called Lu Fan's attention and told him that he had really surprised him by giving him a problem in their first encounter. Upon hearing this, everyone turned their heads towards Shanhai and were surprised. Meanwhile, Lu Fan was watching as Shanhai slowly approached them. He apologized for causing trouble and added that he couldn't be blamed for this matter. He entered the store through the hole in the wall. Han Qi approached him and while looking at him with a confused look, she asked how this matter was going to be resolved. Shanhai slightly lowered his head, took out a cigarette, and while putting it in his mouth, closed his eyes and explained to everyone that despite Princess Jin and Mr. Chui Hongtai being sent to the hospital, they still needed to give an explanation to the Jin family. After putting the cigarette in his mouth, He slightly lowered his head, took out a lighter, and while lighting the cigarette, closed his eyes. As he slowly approached her, he explained to everyone that the Jin family not only engaged in business, but also had certain influence at high levels of Take's government. Han-ki approached him, and while looking at him with a surprised look, she explained to him that the other party had great influence. She also added that now that they had been hit by Lu Fan, she feared he would be punished by the Jin family. With an aggressive look, Lu Fan began to stare at Shanghai and told him that he didn't care if the princess had great power or if her family had money because he was not willing to sell his dignity for a mere dragon egg. Shanghai approached Lu Fan, while holding a cigarette in one hand, placed the other hand on Lu Fan's shoulder, closed his eyes, and started laughing. Then he blew smoke from the cigarette towards him and with a pleasant smile, congratulated Lu Fan for doing a good job and for having integrity. He also added that he appreciated him very much. Upon seeing the smoke approaching, Lu Fan slightly moved his body backwards and then began to stare at Shanghai, remaining silent. Shanghai asked Lu Fan and his aunt not to worry too much about this matter, as he had a way to solve it without getting Lu Fan into trouble. Using his hand, Shanghai put the cigarette in his mouth, and while inhaling the smoke, he started looking at Lu Fan and explained that only he could resolve this issue. He also added that he had a condition. Upon hearing this, everyone was surprised. Han-ki placed her hands on her chest and thought that something bad was about to happen. Lu Fan started staring aggressively at Shanghai and asked what the condition was. He took the cigarette out of his mouth, pointed it at Lu Fan, and while looking him straight in the eyes, explained that for him to help Lu Fan, he had to obtain the title of provincial champion in the grand examination. Han-ki grabbed Lu Fan's arm and both began silently staring at Shanghai. He told Lu Fan that he was going to do everything possible to help him. He revealed to them that he planned to delay the princess's actions until he finished his final exams. Upon hearing her father's words, Kin-kyu thought about the final exam. After thinking about this, she drew Lu Fan's attention and explained that this was something easy to do since there were countless outstanding students throughout the southern province. Shanghai approached Lu Fan and while staring into his eyes, explained that if he surpassed all the students and managed to get first place, then he would be able to help him. Upon hearing this, Han-ki grabbed Lu Fan's arm and while looking at him, asked what he was going to do. He simply closed his eyes and began to think. Several seconds later, he opened his eyes and while staring into Shanghai's eyes, he told him that he accepted the condition. At the same time, in the city hospital, Princess Jinju left her room and called Shanghai on the phone. She asked if Lu Fan had not been arrested. He asked her to calm down as they were going to immediately contact the higher authorities of Dragon City. He also added that it was necessary for them to resolve this matter related to Lu Fan. While she was walking down the hallway, she clenched her fist tightly and couldn't help but get angry. Upon seeing this, the nurse and the patient who were in the hallway turned their heads towards her and became somewhat confused. At that moment, the princess started looking up at the ceiling with an aggressive gaze. She gritted her teeth forcefully and told Shanghai that it was better this way. She also asked him to continue pressuring the higher-ups and tell them that she wanted that guy named Lu Fan dead. The next day, before the big exam, students gathered in the courtyard of 3rd High School. The students began chatting among themselves. Among them was one student who had reached level 11. One of the students approached a girl and asked if she wanted to team up with him since he had mastered mage skills. Several minutes later, a student caught everyone's attention as he pointed backwards and asked the others if that wasn't Lu Fan. Upon hearing this, several students turned their heads back and were surprised to see Lu Fan. One of the students told the others that this was a surprise because he had thought that Lu Fan had gone home to sell buns with his aunt. Upon hearing this, all the students started looking at Lu Fan. He put his hands in his pants pockets, closed his eyes, and simply began to walk. Another student asked the others why the outstanding student who had become useless wanted to participate in a test if no team wanted him. Upon hearing this, Lu Fan opened his eyes, turned his head to one side, and despite being bothered by the teasing, he decided not to respond as he was unwilling to stoop down to their level. At that moment, the principal appeared. He climbed onto the stage, placed both hands on the podium, and while looking at the students, he asked them to be silent. After saying this, the principal turned his head to one side and announced that the great examination of Southern Province was about to begin. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.